Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beyond the Home Study podcast. This is just where we have real conversations with foster and adoptive moms. So, we are so excited to have a new friend, a guest on today, Erin. So, I'll let Laura Rose go ahead and introduce her.
Hey guys, welcome back. We're so glad you're here. We have Erin Orr here with us today, and she is a mom of three, one of which is adopted. We're going to hear all about that today. She is also an education and content coordinator for an adoption agency. So she's kind of got that, double side professional and personal experience. So Erin, we're going to talk all things adoption today, but can you just start us out with where are you in the world?
I am in rural Kentucky. Middle of nowhere, Kentucky is where I am. We have a small farm, so I've got cows outside, I've got chickens, a dog, some cats. We've got a little bit of everything going on here. Yeah.
Love that.
That's awesome. And what are the ages
Yeah.
of your kids, Erin?
Oldest is almost 15. And then my middle child, my son, my oldest is biological, almost 15. My middle is biological and he is 11. And my youngest was adopted and she is also 11. They're 65 days apart in age.
Wow.
14 months was like close, but 65 days. Woo!
Yes. And there's that like 2 month sweet spot where he can say that he is older than her. And like that is we really milk that for all that it's worth in those 65
Oh,
days that he is older. So, yeah.
oh yeah, I bet.
Stuff.
It is. It really is.
Before we kind of dive into today's topic, can you just tell us what even like made you guys decide to adopt? You have these two biological children already. Was this just something you always wanted to do, or how did this come to be?
Always kind of been interested in adoption. One of my best friends was adopted domestically as an infant. So, I have always kind of had this peripheral, I guess, understanding of what adoption was like. And then my husband and I had our oldest daughter, Campbell. And just after she was born, we just got, your heart just kind of breaks for thinking about kids who don't have the love and the care that that you're pouring out to your own kid. And we knew that we weren't only going to have one child. And so we just, started talking about adoption and praying about adoption. And we actually started the adoption process when she was 15 months old. But we initially started in Ethiopia. And when we started the adoption process, I knew people who, from the time they submitted their home study to the time they had traveled to Ethiopia and back home with their child was 6 months, and it was moving quick in
That is
Wow.
Ethiopia.
like unheard
Um,
of. That's crazy.
yeah, and, it ties in nicely with your theme for the month because now we know that a lot of things weren't being done correctly, and that's why there was this turnaround that was so quick in Ethiopia. Um, but we started that process there, and it was, almost as soon as we started, things started to slow. And we were on their waiting list for 2 years. And then, like, I can remember being at home with Campbell one afternoon and hearing that the Ethiopian prime minister had died. And they were not a Hague accredited country. And so, like, my immediate thought was, there goes the adoption because when a country's not Hague accredited, they can shut down their adoption process overnight. Um, and so that wasn't an overnight shutdown, but things started to really slow down even further. And our adoption agency called us one day and said, like, we just want you to know, we think it's going to close. You're a good candidate for the China program. If you want to move to the China program, you can do that, or you can stay with the Ethiopia program as long as you want. Um, so, again, we talked a lot about it, we prayed a lot about it, and ultimately decided to move to the China process. Um, and that was a really hard decision to make because, like, when you go through the home study process, like, there is just so much work that you do, you know, doing all the visits, writing all the autobiographies, and getting all the paperwork and all of that stuff. And we just didn't want to do it again. It was like, isn't there some way that we can do this without all that? But ultimately, we did move to China. And um, it was a short process kind of in the scheme of things. But in terms of, adoption, it all still takes a long time. So that's a very long way to say that we didn't mean for her to be the youngest. We always anticipated that she would
Mm.
be a middle child, but that's not how it worked out.
Yeah, I mean,
And
we
we
talk
never
about
we never planned to have two that are 65 days apart in age. That was never part of the plan.
Yeah, we talk a lot here about expectations versus reality. Like, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm expecting, whether it goes faster or slower or whatever may be. There's all kinds of things. So, yeah, I would love to hear a little bit from you of, what was your expectations that you now know you're looking in China, you're hoping to bring home a little girl from China. What did you initially hear about her? And then what was kind of the reality once you actually met her?
Yeah. Well, when we signed up for the China adoption program, we said that we didn't care boy or girl, and that was the same kind of process we had in Ethiopia. It didn't matter to us, and so we received her referral. Oh, and I should back up and say that with the agency that we used, we knew that we were not going to get a healthy infant. Um,
Oh, okay.
and all of the kids that were going to come home from China from that program were going to have some kind of a special need. So it might be very significant, or it might be very mild. I mean, things like nystagmus, crossed eyes, like that's a special need. And so, as part of the home study process, we had to fill out a form, the special needs consideration list, where we kind of went through and had to mark what we thought we would be able to accept in a referral and what we didn't. So going in, we knew that we weren't going to be given a referral for a child that had like super significant special needs because we didn't choose that. But anyway, when we got Nora's referral, it said that she had possible, what is it called? I've lost it's HIE, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. Encephalopathy.
Encephalopathy?
There you go. That's it. So basically, she was deprived of oxygen at birth. That's what they thought. And so what was nice was that they had lots of videos of her because she was in a foster care center. She had been moved from her orphanage to a foster care center. So we could see videos of her playing, sitting. She was probably 15 months old when we got her referral. So we could see how she interacted. We could get a lot of feedback from the nannies that were taking care of her because the foster center was associated with our adoption agency. So we were able to take her medical records and those videos to the International Adoption Clinic in Cincinnati. And one of the doctors there looked over everything and did a consult with us and said, like, we don't see indications of like really any disability other than developmental delays, which is completely normal based on the fact that she's been in an orphanage and in a group home. Um, and I guess it was nice because my son was only 2 months older than her. So I had that comparison, right there. And, I could remember telling my husband, like, she looks like she could hang with him. Like she looks like, she could hold her own. Um, and so that was what was on her referral paperwork, the possible what's it, oxygen deprivation. Uh, and so we decided that with the information that we had from the international adoption clinic that we could move forward.
Okay, so that one there's, like, so many things that are interesting to me in that because I'm like yeah, like, I come from a foster care background, like,
Okay.
doing adoption through foster care, and to have even that bit of information and enough to be able to, like, then take it to a doctor, that's kinda unique.
Hmm.
Were you already working in the adoption industry at this point or not yet?
No, not yet.
Okay.
No, I
So
was an
you're, like
adjunct professor. So,
okay,
yeah.
okay, so you're, like, pretty fresh to the adoption scene, and then do you like, at this point in your journey, do you have friends that are kind of like, "Oh, yeah, we've done this," or, like, is anyone other than the doctor, is anyone telling you, like, "This is a normal process, and this is what you can expect?"
No, not really. We were pretty much it. We had some acquaintances that my husband and I had gone to high school with who had adopted a daughter from Ethiopia several years prior. But we were the only people in our immediate area at that time that we knew were doing any international adoption.
So you meet Nora. Did you travel to China?
Hmm.
Okay, so you travel to China and you meet her. And then, so describe that to us. And then I'm curious if it ties back at all to seeing this doctor again once you come home.
Yes. Okay, so when we traveled to China, we went to Guangzhou. That was her provincial city, and so anybody who's been there, like they have the memory of the big pink or not pink, purple velvet couch and the polka dot curtain, and the babies or the kids are behind the polka dot curtain, and you're on the purple velvet couch, and our her nanny and the lady who ran the foster center brought her out from behind the polka dot curtain and they handed her to me and she just kind of looked at me not real sure about what was going on, and I always used to tell families this when I was talking with them about attachment, um and helping them understand that it's not a thing that happens immediately. Like they handed her to me and I hugged her, and my first thought was she doesn't smell like my kids. That was the first thing that I thought of, was like, I know she's mine, but she doesn't smell like my kids. And then, almost in the same minute, I'm like, why would she? She's been on a train for 4 hours. She's, in China.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what kind of laundry detergent they use, all of those things. But not long after that, her nanny and the lady who ran the foster center, they went back behind the polka dot curtain, and that's when she got upset. And my husband and I was holding her. My husband was there. Our translator was there, and she threw her head back and screamed. And I looked in her mouth, and I looked at my husband. I said, "She's got a cleft palate." And he said, "No, she doesn't. It wasn't in her paperwork." I said, yes, I know. I read that paperwork. I'm familiar, but know that my kid's mouth doesn't look like that at the top. And so, yeah, we were just like, what do we do? What are we
And
supposed
it's
to do?
finalized, right? This is you going to pick her up.
We were picking her up. It would not be finalized until the next day. You had 24 hours to kind of see if you're a good fit for one another.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we were here, like we had this new child, this toddler that was ours, and we were thinking, I don't know, like we need to get on the phone and get a doctor. It truly never occurred to us that it would be a deal breaker, because we had said on our special needs consideration list that we would do cleft lip and cleft palate because it's so common in China. It was just that we were unprepared. Like, we would have had a consult set up for when we got
Mhm.
home, just like we already had a consult set up at the International Adoption Clinic for when we got home. Um, so we felt really behind. And I hadn't done any research. Like, I'm a person who likes to know what's going on. Okay. Like, I can be flexible. It's not my favorite, but I can be. Um, but I would have researched cleft palate. And, like when we went back to our hotel that night, um, we went to the little buffet and ate, and we didn't realize that a noodle would come out of her nose when she was eating. because like it's all open,
Wow.
and it was it was
You
crazy.
take
Like
her
her,
back that first 24 hours. She
oh
goes back
yeah,
to the hotel with
she
you.
goes back with us. Yes.
Oh,
And then
okay.
you come back to the same office 24 hours later and sign all the paperwork. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a lot.
Wild. Yeah. Wow.
Hmm.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
like imagining your emotions and like how you're feeling through all of this.
Hmm.
And then your husband too, kind of like, wait a second, this isn't really what we signed up for, even though
Yeah.
we were thinking we would be okay with it. We weren't really
Right.
ready.
Yeah. And I was talking to him last night about all of this. And when you adopt, you have to go and take the child to do a medical exam with a doctor. And so I went in the little room with Nora to the doctor, and the guide stayed outside because it was only supposed to be me and her and the doctor. And the doctor examines her, and then he goes back to the paperwork and he's looking through it. And then he says something to me, and I can tell that he's upset. And I'm just like, I don't know. So I just went like, just wait just a second. So I stick my head out the door and I yelled for Simon. He was our guide and our interpreter. And so I said, Simon, he's mad at me about something, and I don't know what it is. And so Simon talks to the doctor, and Simon said, he wants to know why cleft palate isn't on her paperwork. I said, cleft palate isn't on her paperwork because nobody put it on her paperwork. And I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose it, you know? So that was scary and intense. But we got it all worked out. He amended the paperwork. So yeah, it was crazy.
Wow. Okay, so you guys, you're over there, we've talked about some of these emotions, can you tell like, I can imagine what they are, but, like, are you feeling obviously you're feeling, like, shocked, confused, but are you feeling any, like, anger or, like, betrayal to, either your agency or to the agency that she was at? Like, how was that, like, coming out? Or maybe that wasn't till later, I don't know.
I mean, still to this day, we wonder like how was that missed? And like I can kind of understand how it was missed in the orphanage, because her orphanage, you hear about kids being from hard places, and her orphanage was a really hard place. Like, it was very poor. There were lots of kids. I never got the impression that it was run very well. And when she came out of her orphanage to go to the foster center, she was incredibly malnourished, like just little skin and bones. Like, we have pictures of the day that they took her, and she was um, almost 4 months old and weighed about 8 pounds. Like, she was tiny. Um, and I think a lot of that has to do with the cleft and the not being able to feed. Um, but I'm like, didn't anybody, like, she had been to the doctor, we had records. Why was, why did anybody miss it? If I, a person who has never seen cleft palate in real life, figured it out, why didn't anybody else? But, I guess just kind of in that, like, when we were in China, the whole time you were just kind of like, this, we just got to get through this. It was just very much do the next thing, do the next thing, do the next thing. And we had two little bitty kids at home too. And I think that that's just kind of where we were. We didn't give ourselves time to think about it, to really worry about it, and we were just like, we'll figure it out when we get home. Like, it'll work out, it always does. So that was yeah.
Well, and yeah, you're
Yeah.
there for such a limited amount of time too, and you've got your kids at home.
Mhm.
You're like, okay, let's go. Let's sign the paperwork. Let's get on the plane. And what more can you do at that point, right? Like
Right.
you
Right.
can't start making all these specialist appointments and things in China. That's not what you would want to do. You'd want to
Mhm.
just get home and kind of keep keep going, like you said, like do the next thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you get
Yep,
home
exactly.
and you're in rural Kentucky. So Cincinnati's not crazy far from you. So is that where you go first? Do you go to the International Adoption Clinic?
Well, the very first thing we did when we got home was take her to the doctor, the regular pediatrician, because when we got, as soon as like she started this cough on the airplane, and I was like, "Oh gosh, here we go." Like who knows what we brought home from
Mhm.
China. So we went to the pediatrician's office first, and he said, "Oh, I think she's just got a cold. Like it's just all of the different, you know, China weather to being in an airplane, Kentucky weather." Um, you all both know, having lived in Kentucky, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's hard with all
Oh,
of
yeah.
your respiratory stuff. Um, and he confirmed, he's like, "Yep, it's she's got a cleft palate." So he gave us a referral to a clinic for the cleft palate repair. But we did already have something scheduled with the International Adoption Clinic in Cincinnati, because they were going to do a full workup. Like they made sure that like they took tons of blood. That was terrible. To see if her immunizations were strong enough, to see if she was actually immune to the things that she was supposed to be. And they just did like a developmental assessment, that sort of thing. So we did that first, and she checked out well there. They're like, yeah, she needs some more immunizations, but we think she's just got developmental delays related to being in the orphanage. But they did they did send us to a geneticist because like she had only cleft palate and not cleft lip, which is unusual, I guess. But a lot of times, any of those defects that are along the midline can be like indicative of brain abnormalities. So the doctor at the International Adoption Clinic suggested that while she was sedated for her cleft palate repair, we do an MRI to see what her brain looked like. And we did that, and her brain is fine, perfectly fine.
That was a great surprise to
Yes,
come out with. Yeah.
yes. Like we got a cleft palate, but we got a good brain. So, yeah.
Um, okay, so you're home and you're immediately going to the doctors and the clinics. I'm sure you're staying up late, like Googling and researching and doing all the things. At what point does this catch up to you emotionally?
Honestly, it took probably several years because I had the realization like we took her to the plastic surgeon who took care of her cleft palate. He said, "This is an incredibly simple repair." He said, "I think it's one surgery, which is almost unheard of." Um, and she had her one surgery. We went back to the doctor and he looked at it. He said, "It looks great. I think she's fine." We haven't been back. Like there have been no complications or anything. Um, and like I don't know if it was a book I read or just like really kind of understanding what it's like to live in China and to have to pay in cash for everything. But what really broke my heart was the fact that probably if it had been a few $1,000s, our equivalent of a few $1,000s, she could have stayed with her birth family. And that's what breaks my heart the most is that, we're so happy to have her and I'm so glad she's mine. But at the same time, just the way how things are so broken. And we talk about, as Americans how broken our healthcare system is. But how broken it is in China that a few $1,000s because you have to have it right there in a lump sum to get anything done because they didn't have access to that. The only choice they had was to abandon her. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, we could go a whole different way and talk about ethics of all kinds of different things in other countries and all of that. It's so
Yeah.
heartbreaking. So heartbreaking.
Yes.
And I mean, we've even said before here, like adoption, it's always founded in loss. Like
Mhm.
it always starts there. There's a pain and there's a loss at the beginning of all of this. And, unfortunately, it affects extremely young children, and that is the
Mhm.
really harsh reality of it. And so, yeah, like we do the best we can and we want to have hope and joy and all of these things and like have um have like the strong expectations so that things can happen and so we can kind of keep moving forward. But at the same time, it still kind of catches you emotionally and makes it really really heartbreaking. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
so what's that like now? I'm kind of jumping ahead and then I do want to go back. But what is it like now,
sure.
like having
Yeah.
conversations with Nora about things like this? Like, how open are you in talking with her? I mean, obviously, you're talking to us on a public podcast, so you're open enough. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, I'm curious what has that been like over the years of talking with her about her birth family and where she's come from and what it was like?
Yeah, I mean, and her, I don't know if interest, I don't want to say that and speak for her, but like how many questions she asks and how often she asks, like it waxes and wanes. Like sometimes she's full of questions and sometimes she's like, we don't need to talk about that. Um and so like we've always been very open with her about adoption and, the differences between having been born, from my body and being adopted. And, it's clear to most people that she's not biologically ours. Although I did have one old guy in Kroger ask me one time when I had them both in the cart if they were twins. And I was like, yep, they sure are. Yeah. Um, and I just went on my way. I'm like, that's the stupidest question. But sorry, I totally forgot where I was going with that. Nora, how much she has questions. But yeah, she'll ask about, her biological parents, and it's funny that she'll say things now like I might say to my son Declan, I'm like, "Oh, you're just acting just like your daddy," when he does something, and she's like, "I probably act like my biological mom." It's like,
Oh.
"You probably do." Like, you probably do in a lot of ways. Um, so she's saying a lot of those things now. So I know that she's thinking about it more. And it's in a lot of ways it's been unpredictable too. Like we try as much as we can to like incorporate Chinese holidays, and I guess it was year before last while she was at school, I hung up like our Lunar New Year, like our banners at our front door. And I had some little lanterns that I put up and things like that. And she walked in from school and she saw it and she threw her backpack down and she just started to cry. And I was like, oh, like last year she loved this. So,
Mhm.
I sat down and talked with her. And she said, it just makes me miss my China mommy. And I said, I get it. I get it. Like seeing these things and knowing that that's what they're doing on the other
Yeah.
side of the world. Like, but you're not there. That's a hard thing. And so we talked about it and I said, we can take it down. I said, I don't mind. If you want me to take it all down, I'll take it all down right now. She said, no, leave it up. She said, it's good. I like to see it. Um, so, she has always really impressed me, I think, with how, I don't know, like mature she has seemed
Hmm.
with kind of her awareness of how she feels. That she's like, no, it makes me sad, but I also like it. Like she's got that recognition that she can feel two things at the same time. Like I can feel sad that I miss my China mommy, but I like that I can see this and knowing that this is what they're doing. And
Yeah.
that's the connection that I can have. Um, So yeah, and just like on holidays and things like that, Mother's Day, a lot of times she'll make if she's at school, she'll ask to make two things, and they say that's fine. She wants one for me, and she wants one for her China mommy. Like we can't do anything with it, but we set it on the kitchen table or whatever it is, and we think about her and talk about her, and I always talk to Nora like especially on her birthday, and I tell her like think a lot about your China mommy today.
Mhm.
um and I said I know that she thinks about you too. So
Mhm.
sometimes those conversations go deep and sometimes they don't. but we just try to keep the door open as much as we can.
Really speaks volumes to just the way that you guys have been so open with her, because I'm sure that that has a huge contribution to why she's able to process this and feel safe to process that with you guys, and saying like,
Hmm.
this makes me sad. And also, I'm happy that I'm here, but I still miss, my mom, my China mom. Um, I wanna go back just a little bit to that piece of, we've talked before about, like, that expectation, that, reality. Was there ever a time in this journey that you thought about do like, seeking out anything for the agency, like, I don't wanna say, like, suing them, but, like, just, like, reconciling some way, like, "Hey, this was not clear," or do you feel like it was never something that happened, like, it wasn't the US side? Like, does that make sense? I
Hmm.
feel like I'm
Yeah.
rambling, but
No, you're good. Yeah. No, we never really considered that. I mean, we knew going in, and I think that our agency did a great job of preparing us that, like, there are so many things that you are just not going to know, and even if we have your paperwork, like, and they always told us we cannot vouch for the veracity of their paperwork. All we
Oh,
can do is tell you that what we're doing is on the up and up. And it's all, we work hard to make sure that everything is accurate, but we can't do that on their side. And so, like, we recognize that, well, this is, I guess, just one of those things that they they didn't have any control over. So we didn't feel any um like animosity or anything toward our agency, because truly I don't think they had no clue. Um,
that's so good to hear. Like, you're basically like, they couldn't have done anything different, they were transparent. That wow.
yeah.
We don't always hear that. I'm glad to hear that they were so transparent with you about, like, we
Hmm.
may not have the correct information.
Yeah. Yeah. It was nice. And depending on the program, the international program that you choose, you can have more information or less information. I kind of feel like China is middle of the road in terms of what information you get. And we think about China as being an advanced country, but they are not putting their best resources to use on orphans. All they're doing is providing the bare minimum for those kids because they are not of value. And so when I think about it that way, it kind of helps me to give them a little more grace in terms of that. Um, so I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's just kind of how I try to wrap my brain around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about, the fact that you were very open and you knew going into this, like, you likely will have a child come into your home with some special needs. So you're already thinking kind of in that vein where, we know that all of those boxes that you check when you're going through your home study, they're optional, right? Like, you can say,
Hmm.
I do not want to bring a child into my home with special needs for a variety of reasons. We
Hmm.
don't need to go into all of their different reasons, but there's a variety. So if you had said, you know, we can't have any special needs, maybe we already have a special needs child in the home, whatever it may be, and then you meet this child with a cleft palate and or more, um, like what do you think you would have done in that situation? Or like I'm thinking of, people that are listening to this who maybe are in that situation, like where do you go from there? Like, what is the ethical dilemma and where do you fall?
I think that in our case, the only children that our agency works, I don't know if for is the word, but every child that our agency places has a special need. And they're very upfront about that. Like, if you are here for a perfectly healthy infant or a perfectly healthy older child or toddler or whatever, we are not the people for you. And so if I had continued with that agency, hoping for a perfectly healthy child, and then being upset when I didn't get a perfectly healthy
Right,
child. That's on me.
right.
So I think that it's very important to just understand who your agency serves.
Yeah.
um, because some agencies are out there and they are just placing healthy children. Um, and when that's the case, and if you know, another way I think about it is that, like, I could do everything right in my pregnancy. I could, not eat the deli meat and, whatever all of the guidelines are, and still child who
Yep.
has a special need. And, I think that sometimes and I get that not everybody comes from this frame of mind, but like I really do believe that, like, the she was placed with us because she was meant to be placed with us. I would have loved for her to be able to stay with her birth parents, but because of the brokenness of the world, that wasn't possible. And so we were what God had planned for her. Um,
Yeah, I think what you're hitting on, honestly, just like a very, very hot ethical topic of, when you have a biological child, you don't get to choose, if
mm-mm,
they're autistic, have cerebral palsy, like you don't get to choose that. So should we be able to choose that when we're adopting? And I mean, I don't have an answer for that because but it is very interesting because, on one hand, you do get to choose, but then there's the like, but you also could choose and then not get what you think you're getting. And then,
mhm.
it's a very big, yeah, ethical dilemma. Like, I don't
Mhm.
know your thoughts on that, Abby. I honestly don't have like a strong opinion either way. I just find it fascinating.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's maybe more prevalent now, or maybe we're just seeing it more now because of things like genetic testing of embryos, like through IVF and like all of these other avenues that like obviously we're not here to talk all about that, but like those are other options, and, like, you can get to the point of saying, like, "I only want the embryos that are female," or, "I only want the embryos that are male," to even give a shot at a pregnancy and a birth. So, yeah, like, I think now because of just advances in science and everything, we hear so much more about that, and maybe that has done something to our brains where we're like, "We get to choose," where obviously at the end of the day, we don't. So,
It seems like, Erin, like you had a very healthy attitude with it.
yeah.
And not to say if someone's listening that you have an unhealthy attitude if you are choosing, certain things. Like obviously there's a lot to goes into this very hot topic. But I like that you're kind of already going into it with, we're gonna accept what we get is what we get. Like this is God's plan for us. And we're gonna, take it as an opportunity to, um just care for this child. So I love that perspective, and I'm sure it served your daughter really well.
So, and we had a daughter at home already. So we had a little bit of parenting under our belt. So we had kind of learned the lesson that as soon as you kind of feel like you've got things figured out, they have a sleep regression or,
Yeah.
they turn 3 and become a crazy person, all of those things. So I think that probably helped, having
Mhm,
already been parents for a little while and recognizing you really don't have control over much.
mhm.
Yes, Abby and I are reading through a book right now. We're doing a book study for The Whole Brain Child. Have you read that book?
Mhm. I think it's on the
Okay.
bookshelf back here, maybe.
Yes,
Yep, there it
and
is.
what you said just made me think of that because he talks what I'm, like, spoiling the book review later, but, just he is talking about, that, like, middle of the ground and, going down the river and how that's peaceful and you either hit the chaos or you hit the control, and those
Mhm.
are kind of your 2 banks, but that's what it's making me think of, like, you're right, like, as parents, like, we always are thinking like we have some semblance of control. We really don't. And that
Mm-mm.
goes if you're an adoptive parent or you're a biological parent, doesn't matter. Like whatever control you think you have, like it's not
Yeah,
real.
it's an illusion, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
man. Well, Erin, we thank you so much for just, sharing your story with us
Yeah.
today and, giving us, your thoughts on just like the ethical dilemma behind the adoption and just how that's gone for you and your family. So thank you so much for being with us. If anything we said today has made you laugh, cry, or feel seen, please share this episode with a friend. And as always, thank you. And we will see you guys next week.